I was born and raised in New York City, but I'm an adopted townie. My wife was born and raised in Northampton, graduated Northampton High School in '84. And there was a mixed sense of happiness and eye rolling when I finally got hired in Northampton. You know, she had worked long and hard to get out of the city. And then I dragged her right back in, you know, firmly planting both feet. I love working for Northampton. It's of the 8 or 9 services I've worked for over the past 30 something years, it's my favorite. And I really love it. So this presentation tonight for me was very special. The book covers the entire 410 miles of the Connecticut River Valley. But in getting ready for tonight, I've really dialed it into to Northampton specifically. I get to share what would have been, what just is probably 3 or 4 pages in the book, and I get to spend an hour and share with you a lot of photos that obviously didn't make it into the book because the book gets far beyond the scope of just Northampton. So we're going to cover a lot of ground in a short period of time. And really, I'm going to start out by showing you some photos of, let me share my screen here. And we're basically going to start, I want to provide some perspective here on what this was actually like. Sam, I'm assuming that I'm sharing. Do things look good?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I just noticed, Betty, that this photo, which is one of my favorites from the city, was actually in the lower left corner of the Boy Scout map that you guys just showed. So that was the first time I'd seen that map. This here is a Sanborn map, a fire map, and I think this one is from 1915. And I'll call out to your attention here. Here's the original path in the Mill River going down. This is Old South Street and Crass Ave. That would have been right in the center there where City Hall is. And I've got photos of this, but I just wanted to offer that perspective. All right. So headline from the New York Times, this is March 20. Beginning on March 9 of 1936, it started to rain, and it kept raining, and it kept raining, and it kept raining. And over the next 2 weeks, almost 2 feet of rain fell over New England, but not only New England, the entire Northeast, out to Ohio, down as far as Virginia, and up into Maine even. This book focuses on the Connecticut River Valley, but I think it's important to appreciate just how big this storm event was. This map was this is from the Springfield Museum, and it just goes on to show, again, just to show you the perspective, up to Maine, down to Connecticut, and then we dial it in a little closer. A lot of the photos that I have here that I'm going to share with you came from different archives, a lot from several from the Forbes collection that you'll see, and many of you will probably recognize, but many also came from a trade magazine, which I have right here, as a matter of fact. This is a trade magazine, original print from the New England Power Association, and it gives wonderful depictions of the event in the narrative form. This thing reads like a Hollywood screenplay. I mean, someone should grab this and hire George Clooney to enact some of these stories. Just amazing, very descriptive narrative. I was really riveted, frankly. So this map here is from this edition of Contact magazine, it's called. It's a trade publication. And then again, you know, this is early on, March 12. This is the Boston Globe. And you can see, this was, we're going to compare and contrast a little bit 1927, as Betty mentioned, and 1936, which is the focus, but also with 1938, because the events were very different. 27 was a storm that moved up almost along the same path, almost at the same path where Irene did in 2011, and we'll talk about that towards the end. But it was a very short event, November 3 and by the 4th of November in 1927, the storm was basically done. Tremendous amount of damage, mostly isolated in northern Vermont. In 1938, that was a hurricane that came right up the Connecticut River Valley. Very unusual, tremendous damage, lots of flooding, and lots of wind damage. This March 1936 was what's known as a freshet, a spring storm, a flood. 1935 was very cold, the winter of 1935, and there was a tremendous snow base. Things warmed up very quickly in March, and then a system moved in, actually 2 storm systems. The first one came in and dumped a tremendous amount of rain. The river started to rise, ice started to melt, and runoff moved into the tributaries, and then shortly thereafter, the Connecticut River started to rise. You know, around March 12th, it was, you know, people expected this. There's a long history of spring freshets in New England and Massachusetts and the Connecticut River. Anyone who lives in the Oxbow knows, you know, that's just part of the life down there. All down on Lower Conn Street as well, you know, before all the flood management and mitigation systems were put in. We're going to see some flooding around that area from 27 early. But at that point, around March 12th, the water came up, the ice started to break up, the ice dams formed, and people knew what to expect. There was a lull. And by the 13th of March, it started to rain again. And this is where the situation really took a turn. People were not expecting a second event directly on the heels of this first event. And that's where things went from bad to worse. So again, real quickly, you can see by the 20th of March, I'm trying to give you some scope still trying to give you some scope in terms of how big this thing was. So essentially food supplies are being cut off. Milk is being left in rail cars up in Vermont and not able to get to Boston. Typhoid and other public health issues were developing rapidly as a result of this by the 20th. By the 19th of March, this is a headline from the Hartford Courant. So, you know, this was much more than a flood. It was turning into a food issue. It was turning into a utility issue. Obviously, people were largely without electricity, which was not as problematic as the gas, the manufactured gas, as we'll see. We'll talk about this when we get to the photo, but probably one of the biggest events that were sort of born in Northampton were when the Northampton Barracks of the Mass State Police announced that the Vernon Dam in Vermont, right just north of the Vermont-Massachusetts border, had failed. By March 19th, there had been plenty of time for people to get, reporters to get up into the area. So that's, I think, one reason why this thing is so well documented, that reporters had plenty of time to get up here and start shooting photographs of this. And the big concern by the 18th, 19th, and 20th was that if the Vernon Dam, a major dam on the Connecticut River, if that failed, everything downstream, you know, beginning in Greenfield through Northampton, Chicopee, Springfield, down through Hartford, would be wiped out suddenly and catastrophically. So Northampton MSP Barracks, Troop B, was in touch with, had a telephone line, and they were in touch with Vernon. And when they lost that line, they assumed that the dam had failed. They were wrong. The dam did not fail. And there's a tremendous story of the men who saved that dam and kept it from failing and kept power running from it, actually. Amazing stuff. On the heels of this, you know, we'll talk briefly at the end of this. What I found was that this was a watershed moment, not only because of the scale and scope of it, but because after this, it really kicked off a sequence of New Deal projects that led to massive infrastructure upgrades around not only the Connecticut River Valley, but out east around the Merrimack River Valley, all over New England, frankly. And it's just massive, and it continues to grow. You know, what I write about nowadays is that looking at those systems and how they haven't been maintained and what the impacts will be on those systems when the science around climate change is being realized here. So they were built in the 1930s and 40s, largely some of the systems into the 50s, but they weren't maintained, and they weren't designed to deal with the systems or the weather patterns that we're predicting going forward. So we'll wrap up with that tonight, but that's what keeps me up at night. And again, they were coming up with some innovative solutions even back then in the 30s about sustainable design and holistic approach to floodwater management. You know, briefly, we in the United States do flood management very differently than they do around the rest of the world. You know, there's a lot of zoning and regulation that doesn't allow building in flood plains. If you look in Europe and the Netherlands, here in this country, we don't seem to worry about that. We just build and it floods and we rebuild. So I don't think that's going to be sustainable going forward, but we will see. Lots of money thrown at this flood mitigation, and we talk about briefly the Flood Control Act of 1936, and then it's updated several generations going forward. But this was a New Deal project. The Northampton flood management, the dikes and the pump stations and other systems up and down the Connecticut River, they were funded by New Deal money. So Conservation Corps, WPA, PWA projects. So you can see them in real time. Calvin Coolidge Bridge was built with New Deal money. This is from Hartford, again, just showing the scope of this thing. Up in Vermont, down into Springfield. A lot of the research I did, and I cite early and often in the book, comes from this report. It's a USGS report that was published in 1937. Lots of details, and I'll just read from it because when people talk about the comparing and contrasting the different floods, I think this passage really captures it. So I'm sorry, this one is from the 47. This is a 1947 report. This has the advantage of being written after 38, and it factors in 1927 as well. So I'll read from it directly. From an evaluation of known historic records, together with evidence furnished by the texture, structure, thickness, and position of recent flood sediments and materials associated with them, it is concluded that no flood as great as or greater than March of 1936 has visited the Massachusetts portion of the Connecticut Valley since civilization began there, and probably not for several hundred years prior to that time. Although there is no reason to believe that an equally or more severe flood could not occur at any time in the future, the chances for such an occurrence at any time appear to be quite small. So in summary, in 1947, taking into account 27 and even 38, this report from the USGS says 36 was it. There was another event in 55, and that essentially proved that the flood management systems that were built did work largely. It caused other problems other places, notably on the tributaries, like in the Quabog in Palmer and down the Naugatuck River in Connecticut, really got walloped hard by the 1955 back-to-back hurricanes. That was Carol and Diane. I'm in the process now of researching why that was the case, and I have a feeling it was because of the infrastructure that was built to protect the Connecticut River directly and didn't take the tributaries into account nearly as much. This is a screenshot or the cover of the 1936 report. It was actually published in 37, but it looks at the floods of March 1936. This is one of 3 editions. This covers New England, and as I mentioned, the scope of the flood was huge. So the other 2 editions cover the rest, the South and out through Ohio and Virginia. But tremendous report. I can't tell you how many times I went to sleep and woke up with this on my stomach. Not very exciting, but insightful. Another map, this one coming directly from the USGS report, and essentially what you can see is that the Connecticut River starts at the Canadian border and works its way down, ending at New London and 410 miles, about 67 miles in Massachusetts, and dozens of tributaries. Another shot from the Boston Globe. This is March 19, so this is more or less at the peak. And again, you can see the impacts all the way up and down the valley here, and then some. The Merrimack was hit rather hard as well. I mentioned earlier that, you know, this was not the first nor the last event, and you can see this is a page from the 1937 USGS report. Going back as far as 1639, there's evidence of flooding in the Connecticut River Valley. Now, it wasn't until around 1905 that the USGS started putting in stations to monitor floods. So anything prior to 1900, say, was basically through narrative form. So we can go back and read historical anecdotes through newspapers. Lots of good reporting in the Gazette, the Springfield Republican, Boston Globe, Hartford Current. They all have incredibly descriptive narratives, but a lot of it is relative to, you know, the floodwater came up to a certain mark in a factory or at a person's residence, that sort of thing. And it was after 1905 where we started to be able to actually document the flood levels. So that was somewhat of a turning point. But these were, my point here is that this was not a new event, but it was on an unprecedented scale. Again, I'm not sure, I hope you're able to see this, I'll point it out to you, but again, this is just the high levels of flood, and that March 20 into the 21st, basically overnight, the 20th into the 21st was the peak. This was down in Hartford, essentially, but same pattern for Northampton. This, I'm not sure how to take this. If any of you, I'm a little bit of a design geek as well. So this image, if you're familiar with Edward Tufte, a lot of this stuff from 1947 has a very like Art Deco sort of feel to it. So I'm still trying to wrap my head around what we're trying to get at here, but essentially it was a bad event. I still need to think about this one, but I just love the image of it. Okay, again, timeline here, 1936. We are showing the scope of the event along, here's Hartford to give you some relatively close perspective. But you can see here, as I mentioned, the 11th into the 12th was the first peak. The weather dropped off and then it started raining again. And then it really started to peak again around the 18th, 19th, and by the 20th, it was game on. This is an analysis of flood crest heights at Hartford, but again, it compares very closely to Northampton. And this is 1936 here. And here it was 38. So you can see by a large margin, it was impressive. Also, you can see based on the type of line that it is, this was a hurricane event and this was a spring flood. So very different types of events. A comparison, this is from Montague, tremendous amount of damage at the where the Deerfield comes in at the Connecticut River. Montague lost 5 bridges around the 20th and launched a huge bridge downstream and took out a bridge in Sunderland. Tremendous damage, but this is a comparison again between 36 and 38, and you could just see that the flood crest was much higher and also a different pattern. Other floods at different areas, but 1936 is on top still. And this is a different period, different locations along the river. This area here is Hadley and Hatfield, the Meadows, basically the Northampton stretch. And you can see that it was long and prolonged across a long period of time. Again, another very Tufte graphic, if you will, but essentially this is indicating that this is 1936 down here. And you can just see by the length of the line that the graph was indicating that this was a significant event compared to other events in previous years. This is 1936 down here, earlier is up here. This is a comparison of the 1955 floods. And again, looking at other communities, the Naugatuck I mentioned already. All right, so let's dial it in now. We're going to get into Northampton. And many of you have probably seen this image. This is from the Forbes collection. Remarkable. We'll take a closer look at that in a minute. But this is the Mill River flooding under City Hall. Beautiful image. Again, I mentioned I'm a photographer, so I really love the reflection here. The men standing here on the side give it a lot of perspective. But what I'll point out here is this is the Mill River prior to the flood. All right, and I have quite a few images of the river prior to the flood. But look at here's City Hall, obviously, but before the river, in 1936, the river went through downtown. And many of you will see it's essentially where the bike path is now. This is from probably Pulaski Park looking down. There's the roundhouse, and then there's a collection station. And you can also see here, I hope, this is where they manufactured gas and distributed it around the city. All right, so this whole system was wiped out. This is pre-flood. This is going to be South Street towards the bottom of the frame. Here's the roundhouse, and this was a storage facility here. And right along here is the Mill River before it was moved. Another view of the same thing. I believe that's South Street. And this is the railroad and the Mill River running right through it. This would be where the bike path is now. Same view here. This is a postcard. What I found funny was that lots of postcards documenting disasters, not only in Northampton, but back in the 20s and 30s, that seemed to be a thing. You'd get a postcard of a flood or something like that. Here's the Hawley School and the bridge running over it. And then this is Paradise Pond, I believe. And if someone wants to chime in on this, I believe this is Paradise Pond. And I initially thought that was the silk mill. But if someone wants, go ahead.
We have a comment from our other co-director, Lori Sanders, who is saying that is behind Clark Avenue.
Ah, see, oh, well, I will open it up, and Emma and Betty and I talked about it. Some of these are documented, and others we're going to play Where's Waldo. So I'm not exactly sure where some of these are. So please share your opinion on where you think some of these are. Obviously, this was the original Mill River going through, so this is behind Clark Ave. Interesting. And I wonder what that is in the back. There's a smokestack. I got to get oriented here. Very interesting. That's part of the fun for me. So here's a postcard from 1927. I have two of these images, and no cheating on this one. This is Valley Street. And then the other thing I found interesting with this one, you can see previous to the actual current flood management system being built, these gentlemen are trying to innovate in real time by sandbagging. Didn't work out so well. Here's a wide view of the Sanborn map that I showed earlier. This is Sanborn maps, if you're not familiar. I know that the library has a few in possession. All of these are archived now. But these were maps that were made by the insurance industry to show where fire protection infrastructure was. So I find these fascinating. I've got a little online collection going myself. But here's
we have a couple other contributions.
Yeah.
Is we have one saying it's 53 Clark Avenue. I live here, and it was a mill, and the parking lot of the skateboard park is where the falls are in the photo.
Awesome.
And we have a couple of guesses for the smokestack. One is, it says that the smokestack is still here. You can see it in Veterans Park. There's Smith Power Plant, and there's Felt Factory on West Street.
Okay. Yeah.
And that we also have another saying that is the McCallum power station in the background.
Okay. Yeah, we get into that. Actually, that area on West Street turns into a very interesting little hub, and we get into that in some detail. But that makes perfect sense. And And I don't think we can get any more hyper local with that is where I live kind of thing. That's actually pretty cool. So I like that.
Yes, we have another person pointing out where they live on this map. So
This map is so cool because it shows the path of, you know, the original path of the river. And I know that there are others, but this one, you know, this is, let me get oriented. Here's the railroad. And then I have another one. Here's Pomeroy Terrace. So it's disorienting to me because, you know, you see this, here's Fruit Street. It just doesn't make sense to my brain. I know where it's supposed to be, but it's always fun to look at these things. Here's West Street, and that area here is probably around where we were looking at just a minute ago. Very cool stuff. I think I have one from yeah, this one is from 1915, I believe. And I tried my best to close up on the same section. Here's the Mill River again running through. And this is the Connecticut River. The other map doesn't have the Connecticut River in perspective. Here's the fairgrounds, just for some reference. Here's Hawley Street. And you can see, again, it's running right, the river runs right down here and cuts behind Michaelman Ave, and then straight down, which would be Pleasant Street basically now, right? Very cool. All right, this is an original photo I actually bought off eBay, and I'm pretty sure that this is Mount Tom Road, right? And there is the bridge, the Route 5 bridge. And you know what I found, and it pops up again and again in a lot of these images beyond just Northampton, is that, and someone pointed this out to me, but so many images of people just standing looking, right? I mean, I remember going out this year on March 20th and saying, it's cold out. I mean, it was cold on March 20th this year. So look at how these people are dressed. They don't have any sense of what's going on. This is the 14th. If you read the newspaper accounts, they're breathing a sense of relief. They are expecting this to, be, you know, the beginning of a better days. They don't know at this point that things are about to get worse. So I find that fascinating. Oops. All right, where's Waldo here? Anyone? I want to say this was like around Hawley Street as well. Any guesses?
none yet, but I'll report back.
All right, someone take a screenshot. I'm going to keep going. There's a few more. I believe this is the railroad right along the Connecticut. And I want to say this is the Meadows. Looks like the Meadows to me. You know, you can start seeing the infrastructure. Not a lot, I'd say about at this point, probably half of the city is receiving electricity at this point, but there's still lots of natural or manufactured gas, not natural gas. I misspoke, not natural gas at all. That factory down at the Roundhouse is producing gas and distributing it around the city. So there's some telegraph lines, there's some telephone lines. You'll start to see those, and some electricity. This is a pretty well-known photo of the, I believe it's the Route 5 bridges, right? There were parallel bridges going over, or 3 bridges rather, going over the Connecticut at this point. So I'm going to say this was the Route 5 bridges. Please feel free to disagree. That's Mount Tom Road, right? There's the rail bridge. Whoops. There's the rail bridge, and then there's the highway bridge, and then there is the utility lines going straight up the middle. So this would be going over the Oxbow. This was, I believe this is the Mill River post event as the waters are receding. And I thought that this was, I may have had this out of order because we do quite a bit on the Corps of Engineers doing their mitigation or reconstruction or diversion projects, excuse me, diversion. All right, so this is down by Mount Tom. You can see the transmission lines. Keep in mind at this point, you know, not a lot of electricity. It was only around 1905 where they discovered that they could actually generate and use high tension lines, transmission lines to distribute power like this. So I love this photo. Look at the scale of the ice here, the transmission wires, and there's the bridges. And I believe that is the power plant in the background. I believe this is Valley Street also, but this is a pretty well-known photo. Someone can fact check me on that one. And again, I love the perspective, the boy watching what's going on in the background. This is an easy one. Anyone? There's film of this. The Forbes Library has a 17-minute film of this, and I'm not sure if this is a screenshot of that or someone actually took the still separately, but this is the fairgrounds. And the video has, the film actually shows that ferry moving that cow across. These were the bridges across the Connecticut, I believe. You can see they were the train bridges, parallel train bridges. There was a trolley bridge as well. It got washed away. The meadows here. I believe this is the fairgrounds. Also, this is a well-known photo from the Forbes collection. I love this shot. This must be from on the Notch side looking north. You can see the power plant. And again, there's those bridges in what's Route 5 now. And that must be like the Mount Tom paper factory, right? And then look at the river just inundated here. And you can barely see the city in the background, but it looks like that might be First Church. There's a church steeple perhaps. Another well-known image from the meadows, and I believe there's a bridge, a shadow of a bridge in the background to give you some perspective. Great image, again, of the Mount Tom Bridge. Look at the ice built up on that. What they did around March 12th or 13th, and this was common not only for Northampton, but all the way, a common practice was to break these ice dams using dynamite. So there's a story, I have the news clip, I don't think it's in this collection, but with in a private plane, police officers dropping sticks of dynamite out of planes to blow these ice dams up. And that apparently was a thing, go figure. I know nowadays if I brought up that in an emergency operations center conference call, that would be frowned upon. All right, right downtown, right? We're looking at, is this Holyoke Street? Maybe this is Pleasant Street maybe? And you can see right there in the center, looks like three men in a canoe. Church steeples in the background. More downtown. I want to say this is around Holly or Holyoke Street, somewhere in one of those neighborhoods. Same shot of City Hall. This is the roundhouse would be over here, and then here's the storage facility. And at this point, you can see the bridge. But at this point, if you remember, I mentioned the piping that connected the roundhouse to the storage facility. It had already burst, and what this did was disrupted city gas for days, for about 6 or 7 days after the flood, even after the flood waters receded. Not to mention, just dumped all sorts of stuff into the Mill River at that point. So pollution and public health was a concern that was not nearly as front page as it should have been. But so the city gas had been disrupted at this point, and that piping has been washed away.
We have a couple more highlights from Lori Sanders, that there's the Packaging Corporation in the background, and that I believe it was 2 images ago, was pre-City Hall, the Clap Pollard House, or on Old South Street.
Okay.
It was Yeah, there was maybe after this one. Sorry. Anyway.
Lost it, sorry. This is an easy one, right? I love this image. So I'll call your attention to a few things. Obviously, in the background is the hotel, and the bowling alley here. I believe it's the next image. And look again. Look at the sidewalk. Both sidewalks just crowded. I'm not exactly sure when this was. This was this is in the Forbes collection. The blurred rowboat guys indicating some motion. Beautiful image. But here's the bowling alley. And then I think right now we get the other side of this. No, it's coming up. This is more the energy infrastructure. This is River Road. No cheating. So that's going across the Connecticut. And those are the, one is the road bridge and one is the railroad bridge. And then there's a trolley bridge off there in the background, if you can make that out there. Eventually got washed away during this event and replaced by the Coolidge. Downtown. Another shot from downtown. There's quite a few. These are from the Forbes collection. There's the power plant, and that would probably be the paper factory in the back, and the same bridge, and some people there to give you some perspective. More of downtown. Someone spent a lot of time downtown with a camera, which I really appreciate. But you can see the elevated sidewalks are just crowded with people. This would be Fitzwillies. I'm not sure when Fitzwillies was opened, but there's the building there. I don't know where this one is. Someone can guess. I wanted to say somewhere around the Meadows, maybe the fairgrounds. But if you have any guesses where the bus photo is, please let us know. I love this image, right? This would have been, here's the train station. It's what Fitzwillies would be now. And then, was this the Bay State Hotel? I'm not clear on that. I'm sure you guys all know that. I know this is where Molino's is now, but was this the Bay State Hotel? Strong Ave, Pearl Street area.
Yes, we have a response from Dylan Gaffney at Forbes Library. Yes, that's Bay State.
All right, Dylan would know. Excellent, thank you, sir. And then of course here was the tunnel bar back in the day, right? I'm sure it was at that point too. But I love this photo. It captures a lot in a very small area. That's the truck eating bridge, of course. All right, so this image is from my trade magazine here. Again, they're very focused on the energy infrastructure. So here's just another view of that large tank that was used to, I believe they somehow process coal gas, and I'm not exactly sure. I'm still learning about that part of it, but this was part of the roundhouse would have been over on this side on the left frame, and that's either storage or where they actually processed it. I want to say this is fairgrounds also, but someone can check me on that. This is an aerial image, a lot of aerial images at this point. We could spend a whole evening talking about the technology that went into the creating aerial images. Basically, they needed to, at this stage of technology, they were building airplanes and special cameras that could capture these images. These were known as Fairchild images, and there's lots of them out there now, and very innovative guy. The company's still around nowadays. I'm sure Mr. Fairchild would be amazed by the $400 drone I have in my bag at all times and what it can do. But this is an image of the river just north of Northampton. This is around Hatfield. It's looking straight down. I believe that's Route 5. The meadows looking across the river was just as bad, arguably worse in some cases because they're a little more isolated. Interesting image from the Boston Globe or a map from March 15, 1936. And again, if you guys are, I'm sure, familiar with the twist in the river that gets, across the river in Hadley, where that bend is one day going to be swallowed up and the river is going to just decide to move down Middle Street. Here's that area up top here. And the new channel was actually made at that point. Oh, I think I lost my camera. I'll keep going. A couple headlines, just wrapping things up. Another image of the bridges. All right, so here's the bowling alley again. Whoops. I like this image. Again, more people standing on the street corners. And if you can make it out, Dylan actually pointed this out to me, so thanks for this, Dylan. But there's a Charlie Chaplin poster. There's a movie theater there, and it was Modern Times, so that, which was made in 1936. So that just, that's just a little timestamp on things. Another headline. This was the scan from the Forbes collection. So by March 24, things started to wrap up for real. And you can see that in Hampshire County at the time, they were predicting flood damage in the area of $2 million at that time. That was across Hampshire County. Screenshot from, or headlines from the Springfield Republican. All right, I mentioned earlier, and then we're going to start to transition post-event now and start heading towards the finish line. But really, 1936 flood led to the Flood Control Act, which saw several iterations, but it started here and it was largely driven by New Deal projects. Lots of flood control after 1936. You can see there's a nationwide shot, but I will call your attention to what's going on up in New England. A lot of activity. These are all sites of flood control dams that were built or under project stage post 1936. Lots of politics that we don't have time to get into, but lots of not in my backyard. Long story short, with the politics around here is that because of the geology of the river, the flood control, major flood control measures to protect Massachusetts and Connecticut need to be built in Vermont and New Hampshire. So north of us, they were not very happy when we started to show up, or the Corps of Engineers show up and started talking about, building flood control systems that were flooding their fields. Lots of politics went on for a long time, even through the 50s. And to a large degree, some degree anyway, nowadays is coming back with a different twist, but it's still very political. All right, so these are really cool. These are images that I got from after the 1936 flood. One of the big changes was the Corps of Engineers came in and said, we're going to make sure this doesn't happen again. We're going to move the Mill River. So you all are probably familiar with it, but the Corps of Engineers came in and said, we're going to move the Mill River from going through downtown, and we're going to redirect it down through the college, Paradise Pond, and then its current path. All right, but it wasn't always there. This is an original view, a scan of the original plan that I got through the Northampton DPW, one of a bunch, that shows these are the plans for the Mill River being moved. This is the Smith College. Here's the dike. This would be where the gym is. In this area here is the track rather. And then this is West Street. And we're going to focus on this area quite a bit. So the felt building is up here, and the power plant is still here now. So I just love this image. There's a lot, we could spend an hour just talking about this image specifically. These are images that I got from Dylan in the Forbes Library at looking at the construction post-event. So this is Corps of Engineer, actually a crew actually doing the reconstruction. We've got several of those. You can see it's a big project. Imagine how loud that was. Old-fashioned steam shovel doing its thing. More of the same. You can see that they're actually moving. I'm going to guess that that is the same oil tank. It stood, but obviously it was moved at some point. This is riprap. You know, they're reinforcing it to keep from washing away again. And here's that same section. This is around West Street, right? And we're gonna stay focused on this area of town as we start to get away from 1936 and look at what's going on there today. I love this image because this is Corps of Engineers flood control, right? They built it and then turned it back over to the city. And this is the what was at the time the Northampton Electric Light Company. Here's some figures on the local protection project, as the Corps of Engineers terms these projects. Looking at, it started in 1939. Don't forget 1938 occurred in here, so there was more damage before they could get this filled in. 5,000, basically a mile of dike, and then separately but related, obviously, the Mill River diversion with another 2,000 feet of dike and concrete wall. All right, so this is that same spot. So this is West Street, and the Smith College Public Safety Building would be here. Here's the back side of that flood wall and the power plant, right? You all probably are familiar with this, but this is the this was just ahead of Irene. We were anticipating getting walloped by Irene, so the city DPW put this structure up that had not been put up in 50 years, and I believe it was probably since 1955 when we thought we were going to get hit that this structure had been put up. Here is a really bad screenshot, but it was the only image I could find of the DPW actually putting the structure up. And I was working in Northampton at this point, and we were staffing the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center. These shots we took ourselves, actually out and about, ahead of Irene. And again, this is that same area around West Street. The power plant is off to the left, Smith College, Paradise Pond off to the right frame. This is what that looks like now. Imagine if this area was inundated with floodwaters. It would get very complicated very fast. This was Irene. And again, you guys are familiar, you know, when it rains like this, the Mill River comes up quickly and then recedes rather quickly. And shortly thereafter, the Connecticut rises and stays up for some time. So there's different patterns to the tributaries versus the main river. More shots of the same. These are coming from, I don't know if these are coming from the city, from Wayne Fiden's office or from the Northampton Public Media. Actually, no, I take that back. These are from us, and then we got some others from Wayne's office and from Northampton Public Media. All right, so as we start to wrap up, where are we now? These are images from a presentation in November 2012, obviously, looking at the flood control and stormwater infrastructure challenges. These are very big, expensive issues, but during that presentation in 2012, they presented some facts that are pretty straightforward. You know, these systems were built and then largely gone unmaintained. There's a map of the system that I mentioned. Here's the levee and the pump station. This would be down by the bowling alley around here. And then the other system around West Street over here. And this was the Mill River diversion. So predictions of catastrophic or severely damaging flooding occurs at around 127 feet of elevation in the river, which is around the same level that the river met at that point in Northampton. So should that storm event reoccur and this system wasn't in place, this whole area would be damaged to the degree of $54 million. All right, so that's just in that area. It's estimated to be about 189 acres, believe it or not. All right, so that's Lower Conn Street, Lower Pleasant Street, et cetera, around the new roundabout. This is basically a cross-section of what the levee system does to protect us against the river and how the flood management system works. Show you a couple photos. If you haven't seen the video of the flood management system, I found it fascinating. But then again, I go to sleep reading about 1927 floods and 1936 floods. Okay, essentially, this is designed to show you it's going to cost a lot of money to update these systems. All right, so just recognize that. Many of you are probably city residents and understand this. I just wanted to share with you, these are politically contentious issues, and understandably so, because it's going to cost a lot of money. These are slides directly from the 2012 presentation. All right, so these are images, screen grabs from the Northampton public media film. And again, just designed to show the current or the most current view of the infrastructure. That's the stop log structured. I believe that's the one on Pleasant Street. It might be the one on West Street, I can't tell. Yeah, that looks like the one at the end of Pleasant Street. You can see the riprap. My point here is that all of this is supposed to be clean, clear. You're supposed to see the riprap. Look at all the dirt and the debris and the plants that are growing up. The Corps of Engineers says that that is an issue that is going to create a weakening of the structure. And it will cost a lot of money to restore these structures. I'm not saying that this is the best way to go, but it is probably the most efficient and least expensive way. Again, trees and plants growing right out of the riprap, weakening it. This is the Mill River diversion. This is what it actually looks like if you haven't seen it. This is the flood management, the structure. Again, these are still screenshots from the video. There's the building itself. I've actually been in this building. This building houses 3 gasoline powered, I think one's diesel now, turbines that were built in 1940, and they're original. I believe 2 of them were still gasoline powered, and when they light off, it sends what looks like a dragon at the roof. Working for the fire department, on more than one occasion, we get reports from 91 saying that there's a fire in this building when they're testing them. I want to actually go in and do a photo shoot. The video is beautiful. If you appreciate, they really did a nice job, a beautiful job here. But just to give you a sense, this is the system that's protecting the city currently. Lots of nice B-roll. Love it. Also very scary. So we're about to wrap up. This is just another map indicating the area that would be damaged, a total of $54 million if this system was not in place or if this system were to fail. The city's very progressive in terms of recognizing the challenges. And I was hoping that Wayne Fiden would be here tonight to at least be acknowledged. He and his department and the other city departments have been very proactive in integrating a lot of the climate change predictions into the current planning. There's a lot of talk and a lot of planning around resiliency, meaning that not preventing flood damage, but recognizing how to live with it, not keep it out. So I applaud the work that's going on in the city around this issue. You know, fully embracing and recognizing climate change is going to impact us. And a lot of that can't be said for other communities up and down the Connecticut River Valley or in New England in general. It is part of our plan. That is all I have, folks. I am certainly available to answer any questions, Emma, if anyone has anything. But I just want to conclude by thanking you all for attending tonight. I'm going to try to get my camera going again, if I can. And, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. So, but I wanted to thank you and really appreciate you taking the time and appreciate Emma for her support and Betty Sharp for everything she's done for me.
All right, we do have a few questions. First of all, the video that you were showing the screenshots from, how can people view that?
It's on YouTube. And if you search, I can share the link with you, Emma, and then maybe you can distribute it.
If you share the link with me, I'll
yeah,
send
I
it
mean,
to
if
everyone.
you search, you know, flood management in Northampton, it'll come up pretty quickly.
But, all right, I'll get it.
Share the link.
So I'll get it while we're answering our next question. So is it possible for you to explain the actions of then President Calvin Coolidge and his administration in response to the 1927 Mississippi flood and how legislation and Army Corps of Engineers were primed to respond after 1936 and 1938?
Wow.
This is also from Lori Sanders.
There's a dissertation in there somewhere. But you know, honestly, I'm not as familiar with 27 and, but in 36, again, keep in mind, this was the height of the Depression, right? So people were really hurting, and that's an understatement. And FDR was in office, and he was looking to move this thing forward. So he already had the New Deal systems up and running, and a lot of the programs that were around rebuilding and follow-up to flood management were done through the New Deal projects. But how that connects back to Coolidge in 1927 and down south, I don't have an answer, but I'd love to have a conversation around it.
All right. So you mentioned ice jams formed on a step in the flooding process. Indeed, it seems to be an ice jam flood where the flood stage maximum elevation was created by limiting discharge through the gap between the Mount Tom and Mount Holyoke ranges. Question, would the flood stage be as great without the ice jam?
Yeah, it's interesting. And a lot of the reports from obviously the US Geological Survey focuses a lot on the geology. The answer is that is a choke point in the river, and it is definitely was related to the ice jam and the subsequent flooding in Northampton. If you look at the entire length of the Connecticut River, there were some areas that were hit harder than others. Bellows Falls, for example, was not hit as hard. Every other community up and down the river, it was record breaking, except for Bellows Falls, which broke records and kept records as of 1927. And that has to do with, you know, the lack of a choke point and the fact that the river was deeper up there. So there's a variety of effects that, geological effects that impacted that area being particularly bad. But yeah, the notch and the ice and the water all contributed to, and the meadows just north of that all contributed to Northampton getting hit particularly hard in 36. Good question.
Yes, and there's a couple of he has a couple of follow-ups to it. But I just wanted to share his follow-up observation saying that looking after flood stages, I can see that the 1936 flood was surely rainfall driven, but the flood crest in Northampton Hadley would have been controlled by the ice dam downstream. One moment. So we also had another comment about the roundhouse, and it says the large tank opposite the roundhouse is a gas holder. The top of it moves up and down as the volume of stored gas increases or is distributed. The steel columns around the circumference guide steel rollers which support the top of the tank. The pressure of the gas supporters of the weight of the tops, as well as providing pressure for distribution.
Well,
So that was about one of the items in the photos. So in case anyone had any questions.
Yeah, I love the detail. We could follow up at some point because I'm really interested. That's definitely part of like what I'm geeking out on now is like the critical infrastructure and where things were at that point. So I'd love to follow up probably offline on that, but yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so we have another comment saying that the commenter remembers their mother talking about her house flooding on Wilson Ave and wanted to know more about casualties in the flood.
For the city, I'm not really sure how, I never looked at the city specifically. I know they're up and down the Connecticut, there were about 100. That it got wider throughout the entire region. You know, if you look at the Northeast and Ohio and Virginia, but the whole Connecticut River Valley, there were about 100 fatalities. I couldn't break it down in terms of the city though.
All right, so next one is, how do all the dams and watershed areas built along the Connecticut River prevent something like this from happening again? That all came later, right?
Yeah, so it began building after 36, and I showed the Northampton system around 39. The network that provides this flood infrastructure is vast. I mean, and it's just sprawling. And again, getting into the politics of it, some of the systems are built 40 miles away. So like probably the one this group is most familiar with would be like Knightville Dam in Huntington. You know, those systems are part of the Connecticut River flood management system. So you wouldn't think that, you know, building a dam in Huntington is going to prevent flooding in Springfield, but that's exactly the way it works. So there's a network of dams that were built post 36, 38, and that are designed to slow and control flooding along the Connecticut River. Not so much the tributaries, although if you start looking at like the Deerfield, many of those dams serve dual functions. The politics around the dams and the flooding are very complicated. Long story short is that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineer dams are designed for flood management, and then dams like along the Deerfield were built by companies to produce electricity. Corps of Engineer dams do not produce electricity. So there's a lot of discussion around should they and why would they and why don't they? And now you factor in some of the ecological issues that we're dealing with today. And, you know, I was talking with had an interview this morning with a radio station up in New Hampshire. And they were talking about one of the tributaries up there around Brattleboro, just north of Brattleboro. And there's a lot of political infighting going on. Should they remove dams? And what happens if they do? You know, dams have been removed in the city of Northampton, but it's a very expensive process. There's a lot of contamination, as I made reference to. You know, these factories used to just dump stuff into the rivers, and a lot of the heavy metals have settled. And it's fine until we stir them up, and then it gets contaminated again, and it's very complicated and expensive. I'm not sure if that answered the question.
So our next question is, are there ways to distinguish the flood event of 1936 through soil coring? Would it present as a very thick silt deposition that can be relatively dated based on its context to the soils above and below? I'm aware that would vary geographically within the valley. Just curious if there are any consistent trends.
I would say the answer to the question is yes. I'm not a geologist or a hydrogeomorphologist, but I've hung out with them. Over at UMass, there's a whole department that looks at that. Again, these reports that I've been studying come from the U.S. Geological Survey, and the one that was written in 1947 in particular looks at those issues specifically. You know, and it looks at the layers of the of the river at this point. And yes, there are layers that, go back as far as like Lake Hitchcock and can talk about, go back, thousands of years. And we can identify where the historical flooding has occurred. And that's how they come up with dates like flooding in 1639, for example. I'm imagining it was done through that kind of study, through soil coring and things like that.
We have a really interesting question. What should be done to prepare for the future with climate change in mind?
Prepare. I'm very interested in seeing what this new infrastructure bill looks like and how it's going to be implemented. When you start looking at all the different regions around the country, every region has a different set of problems. Essentially what we're looking at in New England is consistent, from Rhode Island up to Maine for the most part. But when you get down south, they're looking at a whole other set of problems. When you look out west, in the Midwest, there are so many different facets to this thing that it isn't a cookie cutter solution. I think that we need to pay attention. And I think if this infrastructure bill goes ahead, and I haven't seen the details yet, it's only just and actually gets passed, it could make a big difference. We're at a turning point here, in my opinion. Between climate change and now funding this bill, it could really make a difference. I think there are a lot of factors that can influence it for both better and for worse. So I think it's one big question mark, but we are at a turning point here. And yeah, I think we need to pay attention, but we also need to take personal responsibility and be ready. If there's nothing that this past year didn't show us, is that, we need to be prepared. We've all been coming through a very difficult year, and you factor in COVID with, storm events, and you factor in COVID with all the other scenarios that are unfolding in front of us, and it just highlights the need to be paying attention and to being prepared.
So we have another possibly more local but still difficult question. Should we restore some of the flow to the original Mill River channel?
I don't know if that's feasible or a good idea. I would defer that to someone in the DPW or to someone like Wayne Fiden. That's not my field of expertise. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
And we also have another audience member wants to know, where did the covered bridge from Montague City end up? If you know.
So at some point, there's a chapter in the chapter about 4 or 5 pages on Montague and Deerfield and Greenfield. And that area with this massive, I don't have it handy, or I'd show you the images, but one of the largest, it was a double-decker bridge. There's 3 bridges that went over where the Deerfield crosses on Route 5, where Cheapside is, on the Greenfield side, and Deerfield near the rail bridges. Those 3 bridges went in quick succession. There's actually video or film of that, of those bridges going. I have a snippet of it on my website. Amazing footage of the trolley bridge going. The trolley bridge went first, and then this massive covered wooden bridge. There was roadway underneath and then rail on top, and it washed away and took out bridges, 4 other bridges downstream. Where it actually ended up, that's a good question. I don't know. The pilings are still there. Many of these bridges, many of the big bridges that were washed away in 1936, the pilings are still there, the stone and the cement and that sort of thing.
Well, I just want to put out sort of a last call for anyone who has any questions, and also ask you another one while people are thinking about it, is how did you come to study this topic?
Well, I mean, I relocated to the Valley in '95 to go to UMass, and it's funny, when I was finishing my undergrad in biology at UMass in Amherst, and one of my last classes there was genetics. And I was horrible at it. I would work overnights as a EMT or a paramedic, and I was working as a medic at that time as a paramedic in Springfield, and I would work an overnight shift, and I would crawl into my genetics class and do my best just to not get caught sleeping. That course was taught by Ed Blakowski. Professor Blakowski went on to, he was a former Marine, and he would tell us stories about what he was doing when he wasn't in the classroom. One of it was making a documentary on the 1936 flood, which was, I think in 2003 on WGBY. You can also find that online through the WGBY website. And he did a project on the Quabbin, as it was being, they did dive Quabbin. So he actually went down and saw the 4 towns. So at some point, I kept getting involved more and more in emergency management. And what I discovered was that most flooding, something like 89% of disasters, federally declared disasters in the United States, begin as floods and then transition to be floods and something else, floods and power outages, floods and gas leaks, floods and contamination. But most of them begin as floods. It's one of the most common issues. And then in the research of this book, I started looking forward and looking at the issues around climate change and how we're going to be impacted. I've done quite a bit of work on critical infrastructure, and between that and the teaching, this has just become my sweet spot.
Great. We had a couple of questions. So this will be our last 2 before we go. Where is the flood control building?
Right across, what's the address? Someone's going to gig me on it. Down near the, we go down there all the time. I hear that address in my sleep, literally. It's down by the flood control is right by the bowling alley parking lot. You pass through it if you go Route 5, leaving the roundabout towards getting on 91 south or north. But that's the whole, and then it's right down towards the meadows in that area.
And last question, was the dam in Holyoke impacted?
No, the dam in Holyoke's a whole other story. That's the dam that's there now is actually the 3rd structure. The first one, I don't have the dates handy, but the first one they put up and within a day, it failed, in 1869. By 1900, they had another one there and it failed a year or so later. And then the one that's standing now, obviously, it was constructed differently. So that particular dam was overbuilt. And no, it wasn't impacted. Most of the dams along the Connecticut River did not get damaged. None of the dams washed away. Many bridges did, and lots of bridges on the tributaries, particularly along the Deerfield. The Deerfield River is a whole other story as well. With what happened up there was that a tributary to the Deerfield is the Cold River in Coleraine, and 5 bridges in Coleraine alone were lost, and they washed away into the Deerfield and then did tremendous damage to those dams that were owned by the New England Power Company. What was going on up there at the time was the ice was building up behind the bridges, these big old covered bridges, not quite as big as the Montague Bridge, but big nonetheless. And local people thought it was a good idea to force the bridges off the foundations. And what they started to do was light the covered bridges on fire. So there's a story in the Contact magazine I have here that tells the story from one of the dam workers' perspectives, where he's working, there's water has broken through the windows, they're trying to keep the systems online to provide electricity, believe it or not. Still, the floodwaters have risen, and now all of a sudden they look upstream and there's a massive covered bridge afire bearing down on them, and that's when they decided to bail. So it wasn't quite that bad down here, but it was getting there.
We also have another comment saying that the first Holyoke Dam was 1855.
Thank you for that.
So anyway, I think we're going to wrap it up for the evening. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming, and thank you so much, Josh, for giving us such a great talk.
Thanks, Emma, and thanks, Betty, and thanks to all of you for your time. I'm sorry I had my camera fail here, but I really enjoy this, and talking with you about Northampton for all that, you know, in this big context. It really means a lot to me. So thank you so much.
All right. Good night, all.
Good night.